So listen to this. Winning the Champions League with Porto was a fairy tale. Winning it with an Inter squad where most players were closer to retirement than to their primes was unbelievable, but still, most would say Mourinho's time at Chelsea was the most impressive. But how could that be? Well, it's easy to forget. In fact, Mourinho himself warned everyone that it'd be forgotten, saying, "In 4 or 5 years, nobody will remember that I was Chelsea's manager. This will become normal." Meaning what he built would become the new normal. In fact, that would be his demise. But first, let's focus on the bright side. Back in 2003, billionaire Roman Abramovich bought Chelsea, hired Ranieri, handed him a €170 million transfer budget, which at the time was out of this world, and still, their only goal was to win the Premier League. After all, it had been 50 years since they had last won it. Chelsea weren't even thinking about the Champions League because, well, they had enough problems back home, as even with all that money, Ranieri didn't win anything, not a single trophy. And to make Abramovich even more desperate, that season just happened to be the one when Arsenal, their city rivals, won the league right under their noses without losing a single match, becoming known as the Invincibles. Do you know how hard it should be to beat someone who's invincible? It should be impossible, and they literally couldn't spend more money than they were already spending, so the only alternative was to find someone very, very special. Dare I say, a special one. Abramovich didn't like Mourinho. He thought he was too arrogant, too blunt, too scandalous, and far too extravagant. But he hated losing. He was desperate, and Mourinho was magnetic. So just 3 days after introducing himself to the world by winning the Champions League with Porto, Mourinho arrived at Chelsea, determined to turn a squad that he saw as a bunch of losers into champions, and the first step was simple. He felt they lacked personality, so Mourinho knew he had to make up for that, and God knows he already had plenty to spare, but once in London, all hell broke loose, and in his first press conference he let out maybe the most iconic sentence ever spoken by a manager. "We have top players, and sorry if I'm arrogant, but we have a top manager. Please don't call me arrogant, but I'm European champion, and I think I'm a special one." Some saw this and assumed it was a facade. Surely this rookie manager can't be this confident in himself, but he really was. When he went into his dressing room for the first time ever, he sat the players down and told them the exact day they would win the league, the 30th of April 2005, away at Bolton. Keep that in mind. And then, before the players even had enough time to call him out on his incredible audacity, he proceeded to name all the players in the squad who had won anything major. There weren't many. Makelele, the exception, had arrived the previous year as Ranieri's star signing and had won all 3 major international club trophies as well as La Liga twice. But besides him, Galaz had won the Confederations Cup, and the rest were a sorry bunch. John Terry, 24 years old, had one FA Cup to his name and didn't even get to play in the final. Gudjonsen, 26 years old, the peak of his career, had been winning the Eredivisie. The same applied to Arjen Robben, 21 years old, who had been signed midway through the season and was still recovering from a hamstring injury. Even Frank Lampard, 27 years old, soon to be the star of the squad, had not even won a minor title. The obvious thing to do here would be to splurge on some serial winners like Makelele, follow the Ranieri approach, and hope for the best, but Mourinho was never one to take the safest route, so instead, he terminated the contracts of 9 players, allowing them all to leave for free, and then, these were the players he brought in. A 22-year-old goalkeeper from Rennes who had never won a trophy. His name was Petr Cech. A 24-year-old midfielder from Benfica with 1 single trophy over his entire career. His name was Thiago. And above all, a 27-year-old striker from Marseille who had never won a trophy and was playing in the French second tier just 2 years earlier. His name was Didier Drogba. Even the 2 players he bought with actually won something, Paulo Ferreira and Ricardo Carvalho, had both been bought from his previous club Porto, and before meeting him, they were both as trophyless as the rest. As dumb as it may sound now, back then Chelsea were a team of serial losers. So to finish that famous first locker room speech, Mourinho told them, "I am a champion. If you follow me, I will make you champions too." Again, it may sound like a humble brag, maybe even without the humble part, but in reality, he had picked his words very carefully, or at least he picked the players who were susceptible to this message, fighters. As Lampard would eventually tell the press, in one of Mourinho's first days at the club, Lampard was showering, Mourinho went in there and told him, "You are the best player in the world." Lampard was caught off guard, after all he was completely naked, and so Mourinho said it again and added, "But you have to win trophies." And well, Lampard has admitted that moment was what lit the spark in his brain that allowed him to take it all to the next level. Not to spoil the story, but the following year, Lampard finished second at the Ballon d'Or. That's the kind of influence the things Mourinho said had on his players. By the end of the transfer market, the squad had been overhauled, and though Mourinho had spent an uncharacteristically large sum of money, he still managed to spend less than Ranieri, and so the season started. His first opponent was none other than Sir Alex Ferguson, the greatest manager in the history of the league, a man who called Mourinho a cocky bugger after watching his presentation, but also one who would eventually admit that once Mourinho arrived in the Premier League, the other managers were stuck playing catch-up. That's how far ahead of his time he was. Regardless, his first trial by fire would end after only 15 minutes with a goal by Gudjohnsen. Then, 8 matches into the league season, Chelsea were second, 2 points away from the top, but had only once won a match by more than a single goal. As much as it was seemingly impossible to score against them, Mourinho's safety-first approach had received as much praise as it had received criticism. Some even called it boring, but Chelsea weren't yet playing how Mourinho wanted them to, and it was only after suffering their first defeat of the season that it all clicked. You see, after that match, Wenger ironically came out saying that surely Chelsea had lost their belief. And Mourinho clearly did not like that, and God knows where he told his players, but from there on out, boring Chelsea went on a streak that saw them score 4 goals in 6 of their next 9 matches, taking the top spot from Arsenal and going 5 points in front, leading Mourinho to come out gunning for Wenger, telling the press that he believed he had a fetish for observing other people, saying, "I think he's a voyeur. He likes to watch other people. There are some guys who, when they're at their home, they have a big telescope to see what happens in other houses. He speaks and speaks and speaks about Chelsea. It's one thing to do that when you're on top, but when it's game 11 and you still haven't won an away match, when you can only win when Henry plays, maybe he should be worried about his own team. But it's Chelsea, Chelsea, Chelsea. I'm starting to worry that he wants my job." Just like that, 4 months into his time at England, the rivalry between Sir Alex and Wenger had been left out of the spotlight. Mourinho was everyone's brand new favorite one-man show. And in January, following a win against Tottenham, the players were on the bus when the news arrived that Arsenal had lost to Bolton, leaving them 8 points in front. In Mourinho's words, the bus turned into a circus. And in Wenger's words, from that moment, we transformed their hope into belief, then into conviction. Another way of saying that from that moment on, he knew he had lost the league. It was hilarious to see how quickly he had taken back his own words, and of course Mourinho did not hesitate to poke the bear, telling the press following another Arsenal defeat that, at the start, I didn't like Arsenal. Now, I'm in love with them. Every weekend, they lose points. However, after being sent to the stands for shushing the Liverpool fans and still beating them to the League Cup trophy, it was time for him to face the club he hated the most. The club who had rejected him. It was time to face Barcelona in the Champions League round of 16. With Rijkaard at the helm, most expected the match to consist of Barcelona repeatedly trying to break the defensive walls of Terry and Carvalho with a flood of champagne football. So before the other team even got the chance to feel as if they were already on top, Mourinho first took a jab at Rijkaard, saying, "His history as a player is great, mine is 0. But as a manager, he can't be compared because he has 0 titles and I have a lot of them." And then proceeded to list the 11 players he'd start, stopping all speculation. Right before naming the 11 players he knew Rijkaard would start, getting up and then leaving the room. If those aren't mind games, then I don't know what could possibly be. But his goal was never to hurt or to scare the adversary. He always had his own team in mind, his fighters, and these moments served only to instill a siege mentality, because when fighters feel they are under attack, they push harder than ever before. And well, after a strange match with an own goal by Belletti, the sending off of Drogba and Maxi Lopez out of everyone, turning the game around in under 6 minutes, the result was set at a 2-1 defeat. But it was Mourinho who was left with a smirk on his face. At the post-match press conference, Mourinho shocked everyone by accusing Rijkaard of having gone into the referee's locker room at halftime, insinuating Drogba's sending off might have come as a result of that. Eventually, Mourinho would completely stun Barcelona in the second leg, going in front 3-0 in under 20 minutes and then beating them 4-2 despite being dominated in terms of possession. However, not even this win was enough to calm down the media storm he created with his comments over the previous weeks, with all of it eventually culminating in the early retirement of referee Anders Frisk at 42 years old amid death threats from Chelsea fans. Still, Mourinho did not go out of this unharmed, with the UEFA referring to him as an enemy of football and banning him from the stadium for both of their matches against Bayern Munich in the following round. Which obviously still wasn't enough to stop him, with Mourinho admitting years later to having stayed inside the dressing room from midday all the way till the time of the match so that he could still talk to the players before the game started, and then having left literally inside a basket like in the movies, being followed by UEFA officials while he was still in the basket and closing it so tight he could barely breathe. This guy, huh? Regardless, Chelsea ended up beating Bayern 4-2 that same game and going through to the semi-finals, but before that, the day finally came, the 30th of April 2005, away at Bolton. Lampard scored twice, Chelsea won the match, and were named champions of England after 50 years, just like Mourinho had predicted. Turns out, it wasn't just special, it was also a prophet. Still, there were some things he could not deliver. Having to face Liverpool in the semi-finals of the Champions League, the tie ended up as slow and tense as it could possibly have been, and unfortunately for Mourinho, the one goal that came was scored by Liverpool. In fact, what hurt Mourinho the most was the fact the ball never truly crossed the line. In his perfect year, Mourinho was sent out of the Champions League by a phantom goal. Yeah, it wasn't nice. However, with the league coming to an end, Mourinho, on his first year of Premier League football, had taken Chelsea to 95 points, more than any team had ever managed, while only conceding 15 goals, fewer than anyone in history. Mourinho had taken his superstar status to a whole new level. It was hard to question that he was the most marketable manager in the sport, more notorious, more loved, more hated than anyone else. Nothing encapsulates this better than something I once heard a columnist from The Sun say. Mourinho is probably the only man I'd leave my husband for, but he's also the only man my husband would leave me for. But no matter what, with the season over, it was now time to do it all over again. And very quickly, things started looking different. You could almost tell how fast it would all crumble. But still, the transfer market began. First and foremost, he brought a certain box-to-box midfielder from Lyon named Michael Essien. Then he also paid just £1 million for a 20-year-old defensive midfielder he spotted in the French 2nd Division. His name was Lassana Diarra. And finally, he brought in Sean Wright-Phillips, the son of legendary Ian Wright, as well as Del Orno and Scott Sinclair. With his updates to the roster, he went into the season with a win over Arsenal for the Community Shield and carried on with what he had built the previous season, getting all the way to the 25th match day with only a single defeat, 15 points ahead of second place Man United. Despite this, the cup competitions did not go their way, especially in the Champions League, where Rijkaard got his revenge with a win over Chelsea in the last 16 round, which led Mourinho to once again insinuate they had been robbed, saying, "When we played 11 versus 11, they didn't beat us." Still, eventually, Chelsea took the league trophy once more, with Mourinho celebrating by throwing his winner's medal onto the crowd, being handed another one, and then throwing that one as well. But still, among the cheers, you could hear a buzz. Some began fiending for more. They focused on their European failure rather than on their domestic success, and by the time the third season came, you could feel the pressure in the air. And so, his former disagreements with Abramovich began intensifying, the media caught wind of it, and suddenly there was speculation that Mourinho could leave the club. Regardless, one thing seemed clear. Mourinho did not have 100% control over his own team anymore, and maybe that explains why over that summer, Chelsea seemed to have let go of Mourinho's transfer philosophies, as though they did sign the likes of Kalou, John Obi Mikel and Boularouche, 3 young players who I'm sure Mourinho had a hand on. They also seem to have gone back to signing already established players who were proven winners. They got Ballack, at the time one of the main men at Bayern, Shevchenko, a personal friend of Abramovich, who was literally a Ballon d'Or winner at AC Milan, and Ashley Cole wasn't necessarily the most established player, but considering they were taking him directly from their rivals in one of the most controversial transfers of the decade, I feel like it still suits the narrative. The main takeaway from this is that they were putting Mourinho against the ropes, making it so that he would have no excuses for any sort of European failure, but then things got complicated. In the Premier League, with Cristiano Ronaldo exploding into the scene, Man United managed to take the title from Chelsea, ending Mourinho's first season without a league title in 5 years. Shevchenko became quite simply one of the most notorious flops of all time, with Drogba getting onto a new level and making his signing seem rushed and redundant, which I know Mourinho made sure to rub on Abramovich's face, as he was notoriously opposed to his signing. And though Chelsea took both of the domestic cups, meaning Mourinho had now won every available trophy in England, in the Champions League they once again came out defeated to Liverpool in the semi-finals, this time on penalties. And from the moment the whistle was sounded, you knew disaster was coming. It was visible that Mourinho had grown increasingly frustrated with Chelsea's hierarchy sticking their noses in his business, and with Avram Grant, a man Mourinho clearly disliked, being appointed as director of football at the club, things hit a whole new level, with Mourinho even telling the press, "If Roman Abramovich helped me out in training, we would be bottom of the league, and if I had to work in his world of big business, we would be bankrupt." Regardless, he still went into his 4th season hoping for the best, but suddenly he was handed his lowest transfer budget since arriving at the club. And though many interesting names like Anelka, Pizarro, Malouda and Ivanovic arrived that summer, after just 8 matches, Chelsea had won 3, drawn 4 and lost the other. And so an emergency meeting was held and both parties agreed it was for the best for Mourinho to leave the club. The fans weren't happy, the players literally cried when he got the news, actually even Mourinho admits to have cried, and after he left, it became clear how some members of the board had indeed been poisonous influences to Abramovich, with Avram Grant, the director who had opposed Mourinho, being named as their next manager and failing to win a single title that season. When Mourinho finally addressed his chapter, he simply told the press, "No eggs, no omelette." It was a depressing end to a story that had the best introduction, but it had to be done. This time, the grass on the other side truly was a darker shade of blue.